Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, we talked some about death yesterday. Today we want to talk a little bit about grieving, mourning. And of course it's different for everybody, but there's this little biblical passage that I find helpful in 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 13. But we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about those who have died, so that you may not grieve as others do, who have no hope.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking about that whole, yesterday we talked about how just fine the death experience is, that kind of coming home experience and all that. It's a process usually people take to get there, to get in a position to actually leave and all. But when they're gone, what is it like for, at least gone from this plane? What's it like for those of us left behind, so to speak?
Yeah.
And it's, usually quite a shock. I know to see, if you happen to be, and I consider it very fortunate to be in the room when someone passes, it's really an obviously sacred event. And normally in a natural dying process, it's just they just breathe slower, more infrequently, and that can take days or hours or whatever. But anyway, and then they just stop, and then it's a real interesting experience as the spirit leaves them, and which is really symbolized by that breath no longer.
The breath of life.
Yeah, it's like you just know they're not there. They were there, they're not there. It's kind of a feeling.
And there's that sense in which, however long it takes for people to let go and be released from this life and the ego stuff we've been talking about, it's kind of like everybody will do that at some point, either in this life or in the next, I guess. But I see a lot of people doing a lot of work on that before they die. They're kind of here and not here, and they're making peace, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And I also think, by the way, that hospice care helps it be, again, a more natural experience for people than it had been for many years.
Well, it's not, it's not totally natural because they do give you drugs to make you more comfortable, but I'm all for it. But so that it's not as challenging an experience in many ways. But the one thing that we often see in people, and Gary and I are really fortunate in the work that he does, that he especially, but we're often privy to be there at that moment or near that moment or whatever, and that's it's just this wonderful sacred experience. But one of the things that you'll often see by the dying in those situations is they'll go through this kind of reaching out. They've got clear focus on something out there that isn't in the room, and then they're kind of reaching for it and all. And if they can talk about it, it's a happy thing. What's going on for them there? They're reaching for something very happy and good for them. So those are really reassuring experiences for us as well, to know what's happening for the dying. And of course we're talking about, the type of dying experiences that we get to see in hospitals and homes.
And being able to release that person in love is a part of the process, the first part of grieving, of mourning and grieving. And oftentimes the person who's dying, they will kind of wait for everybody to be ready. I've seen that happen sometimes. In a natural death, not in a violent death, obviously, or a car accident or something. But in those times, people will kind of take their time, and it's one of the most helpful things is for people to be able to tell their loved one, it's okay that you go. And when you sense that this is not without hope, this passing, because we are eternal beings and we belong forever to the one who created us, and we return to that one. That makes a lot easier, I find, for the family and those who are left behind, when they have a sense of faith along with their family.
Yeah. Anyway, but there is this point at which they're no longer in that body. That body is just stuff. And there's kind of there's like a shock and awe feeling often, I think, in light of that. Because we never really saw that while they were living, that they really were just stuff walking around with this life within them. But so it's a big revelation to see that in a loved one, especially. But we see that in anybody, because it also makes us aware that we are just stuff walking around. But what makes us us is this life spirit within us.
The breath of life, and the Spirit of God moving us.
So the big thing about grief is that you have lost something. I mean, it's gone. That person who was in that body and a part of your life, and they were doing all sorts of things for you, with you, whatever. They had a function in your life as being in that body, and that's, not there.
Yeah. And I think, as you're saying, shock is kind of some of the first reality. And I believe that God makes us this way, that to let go, to grieve things in our lives. Yeah. And it's almost like some denial at first. I can't believe this has happened. I can't believe they're gone. The shock of this. And then you go in and out of that for a long time. Could be a month or two. That you go, I can't believe they're gone. And really, more a matter of days typically. But when that happens, that's God's way of letting us down slowly to face a reality of a radical change in our life, that this person is gone.
There's a really good book. I can't remember the author's name. It's called How We Die. And it talks about different ways, different diseases that kill people and how it does that. It's fascinating. And it doesn't feel morbid at all, because it just normalizes that fact of death. But he does talk about that process, very articulately.
Yeah, well, and there have been so many books written and lots of materials on the stages of dying and the stages of grieving. And rather than trying to force people like square pegs into round holes, I think it's different for everybody how they go about grieving. Although it's definitely true that it's this time of adjustment, and we encourage people to take their time after, especially if it's your partner who's died, to take plenty of time to make your own transition, because you're not going to be thinking too clearly. People are more vulnerable to sickness in grief, because it's a spiritual and physical experience of letting go of somebody that you love. But now it's interesting how everybody grieves differently. Now, Emily and her sisters are rather rational women. We were at Emily's dad's death, and Tom, and I was very close to my father-in-law. We were very connected. And at the funeral, we were all sitting in the front row at the church, and all the husbands, the three husbands of the daughters, were all sobbing, and the grandsons were sobbing, and the women were comforting us. It was kind of interesting, but it was their father had died. It was just very interesting. Yeah. Now, so for you, how was that experience? I mean, your dad's death and all. I mean,
well, I sharing my personal experience is probably not very helpful, because I do think I'm a little odd, but his inevitable death and all never really scared me, or I never felt in many ways I have just as good a relationship with my father now as I did when we were alive. I don't get hugs and stuff, but as far as the meditative counsel that he is in my head, and I can always call him up if I need advice, and so I don't feel like, and of course he lived out of town, from me, all my adult life. So we just had visits and stuff. So it's just kind of a different thing. And I think that is true. Everybody has a different thing. You know, I didn't have a lot of unfinished business with my father. I fortunately only had like one big blow up with him in my whole life. And that,
wow.
Yeah, I know. How did that happen? But, you know, he was a very dear man.
Yeah.
And so that we resolved completely before he died, and well before he died. So I didn't have any unfinished business with him either. And I think that can influence one's grief experience as well. This sort of sense of, oh, if only I had. Oh, sometimes you often hear people say, oh, I didn't tell him I loved him, you know, before he left, or you know, before he died, or you know, that this resentment or grudge or whatever, all those kind of, as we've been talking about, it's all those ego states that are still active at the time of someone's death. But let me tell you, you don't it's sometimes easier to resolve those before they die or you die, but it can still be resolved after they die.
Yeah, that's right.
So never give up hope on those kinds of things either.
No, because, you can still process your relationship with someone. And I did a lot of that when my mother died. For a while, I kind of wrote her a letter once a week after she died. Just kind of, it was a rather weird thing. I didn't send them, but I did write them. But it was a way for me to process my relationship with my mother. We had a good relationship, but there was unfinished business. Or for me, there was. And it was really a healing way to do it. Just talk those things through. Well, mother, you know, blah, 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 you know. We tend to idealize somebody at the moment of their death.
I know, isn't that nice? How wonderful that they become saints.
Oh, well, that's true.
And that's great, because it is true that much of the harsh judgment we have of others sort of leaves. Can. I mean, we're talking as if all this is always true, and nothing is always true with regard to the whole grief process. It's definitely a very individual experience, and it always is an experience, and it always has a physical and emotional and psychological effect.
But one of the things, by the way, people have said sometimes, professionals said this, is you'll never get over it. Well, that's hogwash.
I don't believe that at all.
All of us are on a journey of getting healthier, more whole. And, you know, that's God's intention for us. And to say, well, I'll never get over this, it's kind of like the Queen of Hearts, who was always angry about something and yelled one day, I shall never, ever, ever forget that insult as long as I live. And the King of Hearts says, oh, you will, dear, unless you make a memorandum of it. We're made to heal. We're made to move on.
Yeah.
One of the things I love about Emily's family, and you know, this is not just grieving, but how they remember people and keep their memory alive. We would sit and be having breakfast sometimes, and like when your mom was living here, and say, oh, wouldn't Grandpa Ben love this? Or, oh, it was, you know, and share memories of that person. And that just goes on. It's just they're part of our life, kind of normal. And it's a wonderful way of you know, the journey of, you know, embracing what is unique about that person and how it's impacted on our lives and still does. And it is good to eventually focus on all the good stuff.
Yeah.
It is.
Well, and you know, like I say, everybody's got their own little journey on all that, but there definitely is, especially initially, a big hole. And anyway, we have gone way over time.
Oh.
So maybe we'll continue to talk about this, but it's very complex.
Yes.
And it's hard to cram jam it. But we wish you peace of mind and heart in all things.
And hope.
Yes.
In all that seems to come to an end. Bye-bye.
Bye.